Right now on this issue, and of course the looting that we have seen throughout the Bay Area and a lot of the country. Demands for justice and change are hot topics today.
All right, have we reached a turning point? Let's talk about it. Indeed, let's get into hot topics with Jabina joining us today as a different position than we were when we talked to you last Friday, because the anger, that was before the anger across the country took the form of protests from peaceful to destructive. Jabina, I know you were out documenting some of the events in Oakland over the weekend. What was your takeaway from all of it?
Well, Chris, just for backstory for our family, Oakland, got there around 8 o'clock Friday. I thought overwhelmingly people were there for all of the right reasons. Everyone had their signs, there were songs, there were chants, all of those typical things you see, and that march continued down towards the police department. And it really wasn't until, in my view, around 10 o'clock, a little after, that things took a turn and we started to see some of that looting take place and everything else that happened, which was, I actually won't comment on that. But what I will say is that there are a lot of things that were upsetting from the weekend. There were also a lot of good things that I'm beginning to see. For example, GoFundMe I've been tracking that's raised in 24 hours over $20,000 for Black-owned businesses in Oakland that received damage from over the weekend. One of the biggest stories, though, that caught my attention was this issue in San Jose involving the police officer that was taunting some of the protesters there, and that police officer has been dismissed at the time. But what caught my attention was the chief's response to that. He said that this officer was a good kid. This officer is 33 years old. And to me, that's part of the issue here, is that in some way it seems to be justifying that situation by calling him a kid. It reminded me, granted these are not necessarily comparable situations, but in the Olympics when Ryan Lochte filed a false police report in Brazil, if people remember that story, he was in his 30s at the time. People defended him and called him a kid. Ryan Lochte is also the same age as LeBron James, and I just highly doubt that someone would call LeBron James a kid if he had done that same thing. And it just kind of goes to this overarching theme that we're talking about and we're seeing, and the reason why people are protesting. So that's an interesting one for me. Reggie.
Do you watch this video, that response from people who are really good, from the police chief, the city council people who said that we win people's hearts and home, talking about the police officer in this case. Interesting that we give a long video who are projected to calm the situation and not incite more potential violence. They're given a lot of space, but people who are caught on video on the other end of police officers and who are either being hurt or, in this case that we saw last week, killed on the streets, are given no space.
That is part of the conversation, isn't it? And what a lot of people are working to change. That's an interesting point to bring out. I read something that really touched me, written by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, former Lakers great, of course, basketball great, and really a humanitarian. I don't know if you saw that article this morning, but because there was a lot of confusion, a lot of people saying, well, what, granted there were people of all races out there who were protesting, and some of whom turned violent. Some people were black, some were white, all races, Asians, Hispanic. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote, "This is why you may not understand," and he helped me understand, right? He says people might be looking at it and say, why aren't you social distancing? Why are you out there? And aren't you only hurting your own community? He says, so maybe the black community's main concern right now is not whether protesters are standing 3 or 6 feet apart, or whether a few desperate souls steal some t-shirts or even set a police station on fire, but whether their sons, husbands, brothers, and fathers will be murdered by cops or wannabe cops just for going on a walk, a jog, a drive, or whether being black means sheltering at home for the rest of their lives because the racism virus infecting the country is more deadly than COVID-19. What you should see when you see black protesters in the age of Trump and coronavirus is people pushed to the edge, not protesters in nail salons to open, but because they want to live, to breathe. If you didn't understand before...
Yes, Kristen, I did see that.
Right? I feel like, Jabina, for people who might not understand because their life circumstances didn't allow them to understand because they were coming from a very different place, and you only know what you know because what you know is based on your life experiences. To hear him put that in words and making it so crystal clear, I just thought it would be so great if everybody could read that op-ed today in the LA Times.
It's been really interesting also to read from other Black journalists their take on this. I've seen a lot of opinion pieces. I read also another good one from the weekend in the LA Times. You know, I personally have not been able to fully process everything that has gone on and is continuing to go on. But I will say that as someone that is a young Black person in their 20s and has not witnessed the civil rights movement and all these other things that you read about in the history books, it is just mind-blowing to see all of what we see here, but also recognizing now that I've been compartmentalizing things for years. One of the first large stories I covered ever in my early on journalism career was 21 years old, covering Freddie Gray riots in Baltimore, Maryland, and seeing Freddie Gray and he looks like my cousin, or seeing George Floyd and he looks like my uncle, or Breonna Taylor, and she looks like me. Or seeing Omar Jimenez that works for CNN, and I think that is me. So these are self-reflections, and it is deeply painful when you continue to tell stories about people that look like you and your family. And that's just on a journalism perspective. That's not even including people that have really lived this and are experiencing this in their communities on a daily basis.
Yep.
Jabina, that was really well said. And I feel like we as journalists, it's so hard right now. I mean, a lot of people have it hard, so this is not a wah-wah us, but we are here to serve you. We are here to bring you the stories of people from different backgrounds. Please know that if we say something that offends you, it is only because we are asking so that we can learn, so that we can better have perspective when we report to you what's happening. So I just want to apologize in advance for all the things that I know that I'm going to say this week that will offend somebody. But we're just trying to understand and learn ourselves.
Speaking of journalists, something that I thought was so striking was last night, Sarah Seidner, she's a CNN correspondent, and she's in Minneapolis covering everything that's going on there. And she had just a total coincidence. She did not plan this to happen, but Don Lemon was speaking to the family last night, and Sarah Seidner was on the street. And the police chief happened to be right there. So George Floyd's brother is on the air with Sarah, and through Sarah, asked a question to the police chief, and this is how that exchange went.
Floyd family has asked if you are going to get justice for George Floyd by making sure that the other officers are arrested and that eventually convicted. They want to, and I know that there are things that you cannot control, but they want to know if the other officers should be arrested in your mind, and if you see that they should all four be convicted in this case.
And this is the Floyd family right now?
This is the Floyd family.
To the Floyd family, being silent or not intervening, to me, you're complicit. So I don't see a level of distinction any different. Obviously, the charging and those decisions will have to come through our county attorney's office. Certainly the FBI is investigating that. But to the Floyd family, I want you to know that my decision to fire all four officers was not based on some sort of hierarchy. Mr. Floyd died in our hands, and so I see that as being complicit. So that is about as much as I apologize to the Floyd family if I am not more clear, but I don't see a difference in terms of the ultimate outcome is he is not here with us.
You don't see a difference between what Officer Chauvin did and the three other officers, some of whom kneeled down as well, but some of whom just watched. You see that all as the same act.
Silence and inaction, you're complicit. You're complicit. If there were one solitary voice that would have intervened and act, that's what I would have hoped for. Unfortunately, that didn't. And absolutely, that did not occur. So to the Floyd family, I hope that's my response.
So moments after that, you saw the family, you saw his brother break down and cry, because what an unusual scene where the chief of police is now saying, essentially, that these men that work for him need to be arrested and charged. And he's saying he doesn't have the authority to do that right now because he's waiting for an official go-ahead from the prosecutors in this case. But as we saw today, Kamala Harris tweeted out, she said, it's been 1 week since George Floyd was murdered and the other three officers involved still have not been held accountable. And that is rather extraordinary. You were talking about Freddie Gray earlier, Jobina, and the prosecutor in that case wrote an op-ed over the weekend, and she simply can't understand why it's taking so long. She says this is a dream case for any prosecutor because she did not have this video evidence that they have in this case from multiple angles.
Exactly. And ABC News now showing us this video of the officer and what we can assume is George Floyd inside the vehicle there. There are so many elements to this case. Granted, I am not a prosecutor, but it does raise the question as to why it is taking so long.
Right. And I'm not a prosecutor, so I don't know if legally it's the same as morally, where morally you look at it and say complicit absolutely is the same thing, right? If somebody had stood up, his death may not have happened. But I will say that point about being complicit is so important because intermittent sympathy towards certain communities, whether it's black, it's not enough. Each and every day, what can we prejudice of any kind? That's what do we do? And I think we will work really hard to bring resources that you can get involved in, whatever you're seeing right now, that you are America.
And before people say that we are coming too hard on all police officers, I mean, we also saw a video over the weekend of multiple police officers. We also, whether it be Santa Cruz or Napa, taking a knee and joining the protesters. We also saw on video and social media of some Oakland police officers doing the same thing. So I don't want to make it sound as if we are somehow anti-cop or anti-police or taking one side or the other. There is obviously a history of injustice that permeates our criminal justice system, but it doesn't mean that individuals are necessarily all good or bad. So I just want to, make that clear.
Right, and that is true of any profession, every sector, right? Any group, there is going to be somebody, and perpetuated by institutional racism, but there will be people who are working against what their brothers and sisters are working towards, and most of the men and women in blue are there to protect us and ensure our safety. So it is touching to see gestures, as we're seeing now, that is there, and that is most of the people. But now we're asking, is it enough when most of the people out there are intending to do good, but not everyone? Can we get closer to everyone? Those are the questions that we'll be asking. And that officer we saw in San Jose, it did pay me to see that, because he is Asian American, and I saw so many Asian Americans tweeting Asians for Black Lives over the weekend, and not just tweeting or using the hashtag, but really working to make sure that we work in solidarity, different groups, for change. And so, again, a reminder that we must not look at anybody and make snap judgments about the whole group, because that's too simple, and this problem is complex.